conversation with Johnny V.
Yeah.
What'd
Yeah. Pardon?
What'd you enjoy about it?
Well, the place where the logos became aware of itself was what I enjoyed about it.
Mm.
And then the sort of the movements around in that space. I felt a lot of energy coming into me. I felt quite enthusiastic about that point in the conversation. And the fact that in that point in the conversation, you were talking about the people who would be potentially, the presence of the people who would potentially watching that conversation,
right?
Of which, of course, I was a member, and feeling what that means, the implications of that, which touched on the memory of the fact that you and I had talked about that in our previous conversation, which then ignited that whole train of thought.
Right. Because it does seem to me that there's a big part of this for me that I'm noticing is just, it's like a kind of almost an autonomous presence. I'm walking around with these conversations through the day on some level, right? It's always almost, it's a little bit like, I was just thinking about this. Gregory Bateson talked about the difference between like a blockbuster movie and an art movie, or more artful movie. And what he says is, like with a blockbuster movie, right, you walk in one way and you sit down and there's like the beginning, right, the build up, the peak, the climax, the crescendo, and the ending and the happy story, and then you walk back out the same way as you walked in. But like the more artful, he would say, the more artful the movie is, the more you engage in like a narrative, and in that it leaves you on some level incomplete, right? It doesn't do all the work for you, right? So like, so that's where art, it can be something where you walk in one way and you walk out with a new paradox or tension that you live with, right? And you enact out and you see the world differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's something about these conversations personally, and I think it's, as John would say, the dialogos in general in my life, when it's sufficiently intense or real or has a particular quality to it, has this quality of like, that I leave with these new tensions and twists on things that are not totally complete, but are present in their incompletion, right? I guess that sense of inexhaustible intelligibility at new levels is revealed. More of the ground is revealed, but like also more ground, thus the horizon is revealed. And in some level, I think I'm, in ways that I don't even think I'm probably conscious of all the time, it becomes kind of a little bit like just the soundtrack of the movie of my life, right? Which is, there's a level at which I'm consciously thinking about the thoughts that we just had, but there's another level where it's, they're thoughts that seem to affect the soundtrack of the movie, which is
1 second.
Yeah.
Why don't you grab an envelope? You're going to see a brief cameo in the movie of your life.
Awesome.
Vanessa. This is Guy. This is Vanessa.
Hi, Guy. He says very, very good things about you.
He's letting you know that I say good things about you. Very, very good things about you. I'm sorry. I have, as you might imagine, been completely drawn out of the thread of our conversation.
Yes.
Some words that were bouncing around in my mind as you were talking was something along the lines of like a concerto played out on like a serendipity keyboard in your life, where the soundtrack of your life, but it's like the events, the moments that you encounter suddenly have this new possibility that opens up. And so, for example, I was visiting a Waldorf school this morning, and you might imagine that the conversations that I've had with you and John, with others over the past few days, are sort of always there, and they're dancing with each other, right? They're always moving and dancing with each other, but they're also dancing with the flow of experience that I'm going through.
Yeah.
So events were suddenly popping up in the context of this experience of just watching these kids playing and learning and listening, and the smells. And I was just having moments or perspectives in the conversations that I had perhaps perceived, but had not sensed, and had not made any meaning out of, that would just dropped in. These moments of epiphany, pop, pop, pop. They would moving back and forth. So there was a dialogue in time between the flow of experience that I was in at the moment, and the flow of experience that I had been through thus far. What was it? Yeah, so it was like the concerto on the piano of the keyboard of Epiphany was the phrase that popped into my head.
There's a really interesting distinction that you made. I want to ask you about you talked about the difference between, I think you said, they have been thoughts in my mind, but hadn't yet become part of the flow of experience in the world. You made a distinction about that, right? Where,
well, if I recall, I made two distinctions. One distinction was between the flow of experience that I was in the moment, and then the flow of experience that I had been coming into relation with each other. Right? Okay. So the becoming of me as a consequence of the constitutive experiences that I have already had, the past moving into the present, and then the future coming towards me through the present. And those two pieces, like cream being poured into coffee, and the mistillation of them between each other. And then the other side was the distinction between perception and sensing, and meaning, and noticing. Do I have bad network connection?
Yeah,
always a bummer.
Yeah, either that or you've been doing strange meditations lately.
I did that to my parents. We were doing a call, and the internet connection was quite sketchy, and I would just stop and then move my eyes around, and then we couldn't tell whether or not it had actually frozen or whether I was just pretending. So the previous point was something along the lines of, there's always a massive reduction from perception to sensing. There's just so much flow coming in that's available for sensing, but is not in fact attended to in sensing. But as you're moving into new experiences, those new experiences might create, what would it be? Maybe a weight. Maybe a weight's the right kind of metaphor, or actually the image that I have is that thing you're trying to see, like a spider web. And you can't see it until you move your eyes until you've got just the right refraction where there's light glinting off of it, and then it pops out. Something like that. So the flow of experience creates a sort of a diffraction that allows a piece of perception that was previously unsensed, but was already there, to pop out, which then drops more fully into the possibility of meaning, for example.
Yeah. I'm thinking about this sense of being, this connection to perception, sensing, and the notion of something like what we call ourselves as being a kind of, its being is, you could say, it finds its being in its absence, like the way the womb is absent, right? And that there's a way, like phenomenologically, like with perception, which Toads goes into this. Somebody who really took off on the work that actually John sent me this book. This working out the problem of how the hell do we actually get to know the world through perception, right? Like, and he has this way of talking about it, that there's a way in which desire or absence, right, in a certain sense, creates a kind of womb in which perception is like a pregnancy, right? Like coming into perception is a kind of being being impregnated by the world. And so kind of just thinking about this sense of, in really rich conversations in these dialogues that we're having, that if somehow the dialogue touches on like presuppositions or adjusts adjust presuppositions that I kind of sit on that allow me to desire whatever it is that I desire, that then have me notice what I notice, but then we have a conversation that actually alters the ground that I'm on. Now I start to desire things that that weren't even possible before to desire. So I'll notice new things as I couple it with the world in some way.
Yeah. And there's something that John and I spoke about, I think yesterday. Those things are very difficult to keep track of, aren't they?
Yeah.
So what came to my mind as you were talking about this was just so there's the being of a particular stack. Let's just use that as a metaphor.
Right.
And then there's the awareness of that particular stack.
Yeah.
And then there's the actual ability to be in relationship with that particular stack, which are all, those aren't the same thing. Mm-hmm. So the being of the stack includes, he was mentioning, I think you and he had actually talked about this. He was mentioning Hume and how Hume's embodiment, the way he actually related his body to the act of thinking, that he would sit very still, like he was almost frozen in place. So his body was maximally not playing a role in the thought. Mm-hmm. And that this fact presupposes a quality of possibility, that the kinds of thoughts that you can have are already in many ways prefigured by that choice. Mm. Where if you were to say, for example, be moving, just that simple thing, just the fact that your body pre-exists the thinking that you're having, the relationship of your body to what's happening is sort of primordial in that stack. Yeah. And as you say, there's a set of, there's a whole bunch of stuff, right? There's disposition, what's going on within the context of my whole biosystem in all the different ways that it can be that will have the same effect. And then what is the mapping that I've already got at a more hardwired level? Like, I know that I did a period of time where I was fasting, and one of the things that I noticed was the way that there was these layers between a sensation and then a notion of what that sensation meant, and then an intention of what that sensation's meaning implied for how to respond. Mm-hmm. And so I'd have some biological sensation, and then I would notice, for example, that I would have almost immediately like an image pop into my head of, say, like chocolate or whatever. And in the act of fasting, because by virtue of fasting I was actually imposing discipline on my choices so that it didn't happen, and people have done this in many different ways. Vipassana does this in the context of meditation, that those relationships were fluid, of course, right? You can begin to decompose them. You can begin to actually be able to be aware of just the sensation without even moving to the level of what it means. And certainly without moving to the level of what it intends, and double certainly to the level without acting on that intention. So there's something there as well that I was hearing what you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much going on always already, isn't there?
Yeah. There's so much going on always already.
Just like I show up, there is this quality of experience, which when I meditate, oftentimes I'll see if I can actually just kind of be present to this, right? Which is actually the level of the quality of presence that can come about just by focusing on this, which is this sense of having always already begun. Like every time I go and find myself, I'm already there to find this already begunness. Mm-hmm. And you can feel that in your, like when you, like in Vipassana, for example, like the Goenka style Vipassana, where you're just feeling kind of the quality of givenness of sensation, that there is this interesting experience of, for me, sometimes when I can really tap into that quality of givenness, that there's this level where first it starts off as just like, okay, the sensation, okay, it's emerging, okay, it's already happening, right? It's already there. And then there's this quality where as you start to focus on that, then there's this quality of like, and the awareness of it happening is already there as given. And this this starts to, I think, starts to get into some of this sense of the primordial ground that you mentioned, which is this movement of history that even has me have the concepts that I have, the desires that I have, the posture I'm sitting in, the intelligibility that has me kind of meet the moment in that moment. On some level, I arrive already begun in this particular way and meet the world. There's something about that is, I think in our last conversation, I was really left with that sense of both the sense of it, but also through you, with you, aware and touched by the danger of misinterpreting what that is, right? And which is really interesting. I wanted to read actually some of the comments from the video, which I was really quite struck by, some of these comments. Let me just pull that up really quick. Let's see.
Okay.
So there's
the word grace, by the way, just popped into my head. So just as a flag.
So let's pull on that flag a little bit, because it was preceded with two mms.
Yeah. There was a deepening and a deepening. So the first thing that was happening was the awareness of what the implications are of what you're about to do or what you're in the act of doing. By bringing in the comments into the conversation, you're expanding the conversation, right? You're doing something that is shifting the nature of what the scope or scale or space or consciousness of the conversation is. And then there was a realization, and the word realization here is like right on, of the way or the how of noticing in myself, actually, as we were kind of moving through the conversation, of feeling in myself of what's actually even happening here. And noticing that as I like moved my conscious awareness through different aspects of myself, that what was happening at its highest level, the thing that was maybe the most potent or the most promising, was the flowing or the fluidity of listening to the membrane of what I was encountering. Again, this sort of this relationship between the outside and the inside of the relationship between self and world, and then listening to that, and then also in myself, listening to myself and learning or trying to find a way to actually orient or shift my way of being in relationship to what was happening. And then I had this pop of noticing that then if you expanded the comments, there's this thing that's constantly recurring, which is the flows or the consciousnesses that are participating in a moment, in an event. And then there's the grace, which is to say the artfulness of the wholeness in relationship with the highest or the furthering of the movement of the event, something like that. If you just think about kind of the dual meaning of grace, is like the ability for there to be a directed intentional movement that has a characteristic of smoothness and of poise or something like that, wholeness to it. And then the other meaning of the sense of flowing in from a higher or greater whole that is somehow filling and fulfilling or orienting choices. And so you can imagine that maybe those two meanings are not separate; they're the same, and that what we're called to is grace, is to maybe embody grace into the world, and that the moment that you're about to now enter us into, the portal that we're passing through, has the opportunity and invitation to continue to do that.
Mm. So as you were talking about grace, and as you were describing it and pulling it apart and bringing in your own experience in the moment as it was happening, while announcing what we were going to be doing, it just occurred to me, it was like, oh yeah, like, this is very graceful of you, in gathering all of that together while tracking what's happening and holding multiple threads. Is very musical.
Mm.
And I think I got curious about it. Seems like there's a particular unique capacity I've noticed that you have, that strikes me as quite unusual, in the way that you bring in what you're noticing in the present moment as the about from which you're talking, right? You include what's happening as it's happening, as you're describing what that's in relationship to and where that is moving toward, and weave that together in a very musical sense. Like it has an improvisational quality to it. I was just wondering, how do you do that?
I wish I knew.
That thing. That thing that feels good.
Whoosh, man. Yes, I think simplifying the language would be helpful.
Yeah. Or I would imagine, was it a kind of thing that you were aware of, or did it just start happening and people went, that they started responding to it?
Yeah, but most of the time, not with a lot of smiles, more with frowns. But with increasing smiles. So maybe I'm getting better at it. The world's getting more happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
It has something to do with, so maybe this is it. It's something like, if I really, really pay attention to what we might think of as my primordial experience,
Mm-hmm.
it's extremely kaleidoscopic and confusing, I suppose might be a way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my basic experience has, my sensorium is not simple, and even like the notion of like stringing together moment to moment isn't obvious. Like, I have an experience that time isn't necessarily strictly linear. My primary experience is that time isn't necessarily strictly linear.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a practice of binding experience in such a way that generates a sensation of linear here-ness that actually is, from my perspective, like through my life, has been a practice, like an effort necessary to be in relationship with mostly people, by the way. I find that in relationship with nature, there's nothing problematic, or nothing challenging in terms of my more primary mode. But people seem to really need to have things be pretty linear, and be quite flat in dimensionality. And so a practice of learning how to bring things that are distinctly my own personal experiences, being distinctly nonlinear and distinctly not flat, into something that more people find to be more pleasant, is it. But beyond that, all I can say is sort of, it's like exactly the same thing as asking a juggler how they learned how to juggle. I can maybe give literally my own personal, like, here's the things that I have done, but it may not be a mapping to be at all helpful.
So it sounds like, so a couple things. Like, let me see if I'm hearing it. So one, what I heard you say is that there's a way in which your experience shows up. First of all, um, in not very linear, people friendly, right? And that you come into the context of another's listening. It calls forth. It's like, in order to be with people in that way and to communicate what's happening for you, what I think I'm imagining, I think what's impressive, or what I'm hearing is impressive to me or stands out to me, is that it doesn't sound like you went, because it seems like what most of the time happens is that we get in front of people and there's this difference between our experience and in the way that it's asked others to be presented as. And I think most of the time people actually stop calling their experience real, and they start calling the way that they talk about their experience as real. Right? So it's more like, I think that they kind of dam, you could say, the map becomes the territory. And the territory becomes the thing that gets in the way of the map being correct or not. And so
this sounds really good. This all sounds really good.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is like, there's a I don't know if it's natural or there's a particular proclivity that you have, that the reality, the complexity of your experience, which is like multidimensional, depending on what, in what way you look at it, all happening at once, that for you to speak with people or to share with people, there's you stay true to the actual experience, the territory, the experience, and you bring it into a constraint called talking to somebody word after word, and it sings, but it seems like that the authenticity part that I feel is in your loyalty to your experience.
Sounds nice.
Yeah.
It certainly doesn't seem wrong. It seems
Yeah.
there's something about that feels like it's a like there's like words like healthy and rich and helpful in terms of how what you're expressing is coming across.
Right. And then the when you talked about like, well, increasingly it brings more smiles, right? And in the beginning it didn't so much. Say more about that. What was that when you started having jazz riffs?
In the beginning.
Yeah, in the beginning.
Well, that in the beginning, it was actually a very not the beginning. The beginning is going to be in relatively early childhood, but the place that I remember, and there's a combination between the feeling of remembering it and the story of it, right? Because there's been so much awareness of that, was actually at this really cool summer camp when I was a teenager or preteen at Duke University, Duke Tip, back in the 80s. And being brought out of the context that I was in, which was like San Antonio, Texas, the far northwest portion, into this context where there was a combination of, I think, two factors that I think really, well, maybe three. One was everybody who was there was selected, bizarrely enough, on the basis of having gotten above a certain score on the SAT in fifth grade. And I guess meta-selected by the fact that they were aware of the notion that they chose to participate, they scored that score, then they chose to follow up on the offer and had the money or scrape together the money to participate. Then there was also a very large number of cultural contexts that they were being pulled from, mostly domestic, continental North America, although not exclusively, but mostly. And then you had the fact that there was an age slice, right? So it was very much pulling kids at a certain age together, with the context of adults who, again, had sort of chosen and had been selected to be in that relationship. And so there was a lack of a prefiguring of what right relationship would be.
Mm.
And a lot of explicit experimentation by necessity
Mm.
in a developmental stage that was quite primed for that.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a number, like almost every, or certainly most conversations had this characteristic of implicit liminality.
Mm.
No way of actually even importing much context.
Mm.
Even like sexual gender context, because you're at an age where a lot of that stuff is very not well understood or known. So you're not coming with a lot of assumptions, and everybody's coming with different ideas anyway. And so a lot of liminality is a primary context, and so then intrinsically just being afforded the possibility of exploring in what is available in this particular relationship for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And with individuals who had to a greater or lesser extent, either a capacity or a willingness to engage in that dance.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, the one of the things that is I've just noticed in speaking with you, which is part of the rare part, is that you include the thing that's available in the moment. Like the thing that's happening right now is one of the things that kind of makes it, to me, really sing. But also, it's very rare, I find, because most conversations have a triangular structure to it. Like there's me, there's you, and then there's what we're talking about, right? But there's moments where when you say, I notice being with you, for example, and then you include where there's a moment where it's like the aboutness becomes what's happening. And that is to me, that's a very different experience. The moment, with anybody, if you walk outside and you want to instantly become more alive and freak somebody out, just go to the cashier and just say, yeah, being with you right now, I'm just noticing the light coming off your cheek, and I feel this. And there's a quality of intimacy that it evokes.
Mm-hmm.
It is pre-reflective. We know exactly what's going on, and we know to be struck by it or have a non-neutral experience about it. And so I think one of the things that grabs my attention about that, you've just found a way to do that in the way that you do, and quite often, at least in the context in which I hear you speak, given that it's so almost taboo to do, right? That you have found it to be a practice upon which you have cultivated throughout your life and keep doing, just strikes me as a certain kind of necessity. I imagine a certain necessity that would have one be willing to.
Yes, that's the right word. Definitely, that's exactly where I was going through all kinds of stuff there. But that notion of necessity, I think, is exactly right. There's an obligation. It's just, but obligate in the sense of woven so deeply into the nature that it's just to be includes that.
Yeah. What is it that you're obliged to obligate, right? To be obligated by? What is that?
Ah, that's a really good question.
Uh-huh.
Where'd that question come from?
A sense of, I think, one of like really wanting to hear you. So also a felt sense of a deeper ground, like some of I think it's more articulation in really hearing. I want to almost hear the song that you're hearing that has you. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that is a really deep question.
Hmm. I just felt my heart.
That word song was, yeah, holy cow. There's something like, I mean, the words that pop out are words that we have in our vocabulary. It's funny. I just realized now I'm doing something that I've seen John do several times, which is curse the impoverishment of our language. Words like soul, words like daemon, these that Peter is bringing back into the vernacular, to my delight. Words like well, you know what? Can I tell you a story?
Please.
A while back, not too long ago, maybe like 10 years ago, I was quite interested in trying to imagine or explore the something along the lines of the notion of the singularity, the technological singularity.
Mm-hmm.
And a way of putting it is something like there's a technology has a characteristic of changing the possibility of agency.
Mm-hmm.
And we might think of it as an expanding frontier of the capacity to move from not being able to do something to being able to do something, at least in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
I remember sitting and staring at a match head for a long time and just sort of imagining, like, why is it that I can't simply cause the match head to explode into flame? And why is it also that I can actually just take the match head and with the least amount of intention, swipe it in a certain way and explodes into flame? Like, what's happening there? The distance between those 2 points.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was contemplating this notion of what technology is as a change in the possibility of what can be done, and then I was just imagining as a thought experiment, what happens if we imagine a singularity, meaning that the capacity of technology increasing and increasing and increasing, the possibility of what can be done becomes increasingly infinite. Or to invert, we might say that which is obligate in nature becomes increasingly optional in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this then leads to a very precise point, which is what remains. What remains in that context?
Mm-hmm.
So we could say as a thought experiment, in principle, I could, for example, imagine a circumstance where I could expand my memory computation to be able to have access to the total memory on the internet, right? That's not that hard. But if I can do that, maybe I can also load my own memories and have the ability to have eidetic memory recall added. But well, of course, if I could do that, then I could also load your memories. Ooh, that's quite interesting. I could have first-person experience of your memories, in principle, right? If the obligations of nature go away. And so what I ended up having when I kind of did this sort of Cartesian reductio through technology, instead of inventing an omniscient or omnipotent, what was it, a genie? Actually just working through becoming one. What does it mean to be the genie, not to be the subject of the genie? It ends up with this sort of a singular point, like a singular point that has a trajectory, and that seems to be a really, like, that is this notion of the binding of obligateness, like what is in fact simply that which is irreducible as self. So the quality of that and how we can even think or talk about what the qualities of that might be feels A, fruitful, B, better done in poetry, and C, challenging, but would be the answer to the question that you're asking.
Wow. And I would imagine if we got it, maybe we would be the ones that go up in flames.
well, one way of thinking about it is something along the lines of we're getting it through the process of being thrown into the world. Like the only way that this is like you were talking about, it's always already here. Like it's always already here is the context of ourself. We are happening in ourselves to ourselves. And as we unfurl ourselves in the process of actually simply experiencing and being in life, we're given the capacity to perceive that which has always been here.
Yeah, and it's really an interesting thing about what exactly am I perceiving? Like, so that I think maybe this starts to get at a little bit of what you're talking about, or to become more boggled by it, sufficiently perplexed, right? Which I'm constantly seeking to hopefully be sufficiently perplexed by the uncanny awkwardness I find myself constantly in. Occasionally admitting it.
I had I apologize. I have a friend, Michael Vassar, and I was thinking about like, oh, you know, like, oh, great, yeah, I love Michael as well. That's exactly the appropriate relationship to have with Michael. And this movement from like, let's say like curious to perplexed to sufficiently perplexed. And I was imagining like the cascade, like gobsmacked is up here, but then he has one where it's, you know, ah! He just does that. You're like, okay, that one, you've just got it. That's the right place to be. What if it just happened there? That's
right. That's the spark. Yes. There's a exercise I do sometimes with people to kind of to see if we can kind of tap into what it is, the phenomenological mystery of the most simple thing in the world, like called looking at someone else, right? Of like what exactly to open that up, right? And to experience the mystery that's concealed in that is what I'll do is I'll like in my courses and stuff, I'll have people kind of like face one another, and then I'll have like one person look at the other person's eye, and I'll say, you know, and first there's this kind of awkwardness, right? First of all, like you're facing each other and you're looking at me, and you know, there's all kinds of things that get triggered around that. But like then what I have them do is like, okay, now look at the person's left eye, and then describe it in absolute detail, much as you can, right? And so they'll be like, okay, so it's like there's a shiny yellow glistening, and then there's it's not totally brown, it's like greenish red, and then it moves in this yellow, and then you just get them in at some point they do that artistic switch, right? And then I'll have them do that for 2-3 minutes until they're kind of in the flow of that. Okay, now what I want you to do is just keep looking right where your eye is looking, right? Keep it right there. And now what I want you to do is, instead of describing their eye, just simply keep looking there and see them. And there's this experience of, whoa. And then we go into kind of an inquiry about like, what exactly, right, am I seeing when I see you? What do you think it is? What is that? Is it more like I'm apprehending you? Am I, because I'm looking, my eye is looking at the same place, right?
Yeah.
The same sensory
apprehension. Yeah, that's good. I like that.
Is that it?
Yeah. Well, it's like this thing. Man, again, I think I'll invoke either. And I'm really actually, now that we're in this conversation, enjoying the way that the previous conversations that I have now perceived, because we're in the moment, we're flowing, are melting. So I'm not quite clear right now whether or not what I'm about to say is something that I thought, that I imagined thinking, that I imagined saying, that I heard you say, that I heard John say, that I heard you and John say. Like, I'm not quite clear. Something in one somewhere in that space. Right. But it had to do with something like, what was it, like the total surface area, or the truly enormous capacity for awareness that is actually available. And the feeling of actually sort of popping into something where, and I mean, the power of the way you frame that experiment, the ability to be like something around the ability to be like focused on a particular portion of that surface area of awareness, and then popping the whole surface of awareness open at the same time. does something, right? So what I would say is that, again, almost as always already, I'm always already perceiving a wholeness of you through and via the wholeness of me. But probably particularly because it's and biologically, revolutionarily necessary. And certainly we have been trained to, we dispense with most of it, and we just sort of focus on the parts that are called practically relevant. And so it's an interesting, beautiful constraint to create, to unlock that, or unlock, to liberate that capacity to simply realize that we certainly have vastly more capacity to be aware than I think we're usually noticing. Something like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. And
wow. Well, the other thing I noticed, I just wanted to share, was that probably much more meaningful than the set of words that I just said was there a deep, deep feeling of, like, hard to explain, maybe bittersweetness, or, when you, let me know if this lands, because this may just be my experience, but when you imagine the experience of your own child, or your, someone who you know, and you imagine the experience of them thinking about you after you have died, or simply if you simply contemplate the reality of mortality and about the infinity of the individual you're in relationship with, and simultaneously the certainty of their finitude, there's a feeling that I have when I imagine that, when I'm sort of in relationship with that experience. And that was the experience that I was just having. So the feeling, the quality of feeling that I was having.
And the feeling, I just want to make sure, I don't know if I totally got what you just said. So the feeling that comes with when you imagine your child thinking of you after you have died.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you imagine that there's somebody I love thinking of me when I'm no longer there. When you imagine that feeling gets evoked. There's a feeling that comes with that.
At least it's a sort of an example. It's not. It's more like there's certain experiences of for example, I remember one time I was taking a look at Vanessa, who you've now seen, and I just found myself actually seeing her age, like in real time. I was just watching her become older and older and older, and then eventually seeing her quite ancient, and that feeling in the heart of the moment passing away, I think, is probably the essence of it. The fact of passing away, the fact that there is simultaneously such an extraordinary amount of beauty in this other person. And now I'm back to you're looking at somebody in the eye. The instantaneous apprehension of the singularity, and simultaneously being present to the reality of its ephemerality is that quality of feeling.
Yeah, that ephemerality. Yeah, I just keep getting this sense of just something like the phenomenology of myself seems to be a little bit more like more like a phantom limb, like that is in some ways gets really highlighted in that experience. I've never really thought about that before, of thinking about, my son, at some point I'll be dead and my son is going to be thinking about me when I'm no longer there. Like just this sense of this because I think a lot of this is, I've been doing circling for 20 years. And so a lot of circling has just been looking at the mystery of what's going on in this thing that we call talking and relating. It seems to be, without it, I don't even know I am. Like, put a baby on the island, if it could raise itself, you come back and it'd be like, how you doing? It'll be like, what's a you? Where's the you, right? there's this kind of way in where it's very hard for me to distinguish this sense of self from this coupledom with otherness. And I think that there's something about, you know, in a certain way that the, you know, myself is an absence that gets revealed in in the revelation of otherness somehow. And that otherness is, you know, that whole thing with Harding, Harding talks about the headless way, right? Where he's like, where he realized that if he drew a self-portrait, all he could draw is the world, right? Fading into the background. He never saw his own face.
Mm-hmm.
Your own face, even in a mirror, right, is not the face that you live, right? It's the face that others see. So this sense of otherness is a kind of a phantom limb, if you will, from these deep engagements that I have with other people. So there's this kind of quality of well, and also bringing this back to what I was referring to with you, that when you share the impact of what's happening with you in the moment and you bring that to present, right? There's a way in which, it's so interesting, there's a way in which I find myself with you being heard, right? Because I'm aware of something I've said or a way that I was that had registers in the experience of you being changed in some way, right? There's some way when you reveal yourself in the moment experience that somehow I find myself in some way in your understanding of the change registering with you. Yeah.
Wow, that sounds that sentence, by the way, I don't know if you've said that particular sentence before, but that's a very beautiful sentence.
Which one?
Sometimes I reveal myself in your understanding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Since we happen to be using a recording medium, I probably did not say it perfectly, and I think perfectly would be a good way to say it. Yeah, it feels to me like there's just something right about that. Like there's just rightness. Like that's what we're here for.
Right. Yeah. And speaking of what got us going on this was, let's read some of the comments.
Yes.
Of our last video. And I was just really I think one of the things that I would say that what I was really struck by was actually how warm and touched people shared their experience of the impact of watching the video. Which YouTube is not known for such warm.
It's not famous for, no.
News for. So I was just really struck by it. And I just wanted to bring them into the conversation here. One says, whatever this was one of the most human things I've ever witnessed. Here's another one. This chat was like two surfers riding each other's waves, stopping for a moment to work out what the heck just happened or discuss how cool that ride, and then doing it all over again. Two surfers having intense conversation between sets, getting momentarily distracted until one of them would say, "Dude, next wave is in." Loved it.
That sounds like a very fun thing to do.
Totally. We should try it sometime.
I think both of us have availability.
The world needs a lot more of this. Thank you for modeling it for all to see. Cracking a well-concealed hard nut open, unveiling the human heart, its fearful tremblings, its raw confusions, and putting aside the verbal and conceptualizing armor of the mind. Master and apprentice, did you say? It's like poetry. Wow, you landed the thing. the sacred song. Thank you both. But this wasn't just a presentation for me. It landed there. I landed there with you, now flying. Boom. Dropping in of the realization of what it would mean to deal with Heidegger in the context of a group of people in a process that actually could enable the group to have a collective capacity.
So what's going on for you right now?
It's like, for me,
Mm-hmm.
well, one of the things I think I could just say what struck me about it was the warmth, right? Of where people, what I'm getting is that people were actually touched in the experience that they had in the conversation that we had. Like, it wasn't just talking about the ideas, but what got heard, right? Was the we like in some respects that to listen to it was to engage in the conversation in a certain sense and be landed with us in that way. And I would have to say I think that stands out for me because I just think that there's so much, there's a mysterious possibility that I feel we're getting close to with this, and that what got heard is showing us more, can show us more about what it is that we're engaging with and what we're engaging in. In other words, I'm really happy to be talking with you, and my heart feels warmed.
Yes, I have the distinct feeling of that like ecstatic terror of doing something that is like most, it's like falling in love. Yes, it's like something that is most meaningful and something where there's no way of being anything but just exactly where you are in it, meaning that what happens happens, and yet most meaningful.
Yeah.
And so noticing that small, high speed, like riding a bicycle, very high speed down the road, where a small rock in the road could cause a catastrophic crash. And yet the kind of the lifting of wings into the wind of the high speed and feeling the elation of the lift and the possibility. And what you said earlier, I thought was really, really powerful. I felt connected to something when you were talking about the mysterious possibility. And I almost feel like a responsibility or an appropriateness to nod in that direction.
Right.
Or welcoming also.
Yes. Got so many. I felt the terror at the same time. There's so many dangers in it.
Yeah.
Like mostly the dangers feel like ways in which I can easily convince myself that we're no longer doing that.
Yeah. Or that you could never possibly do it again.
Yeah.
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 Which is kind of funny because if I invoke the metaphor that was given to us of the surfers, you surfed, yes?
Clumsily, yes.
Me too. We call it enthusiastically and clumsily, and with a weird bias towards waves that are much larger than I'm ready for.
Well, once I realized that I never thought about it, that you have to swim out. I didn't do it that much afterwards. I always just thought like waves in, but I didn't realize most of it is like.
Yeah. So using that metaphor, the experience of that when you're riding the wave, you're really, really well advised not to be worrying about whether or not you can ride that wave. And it's in fact, if you're on the wave, the best thing to do is just to be like really settle into it and just allow it to happen. And like the beauty of the humility of recognizing that whether or not you are ready, willing, able, or worthy of riding the wave, it's happening, it's happening. Again, back to that notion of grace, like to be graceful in the context of grace, to be full of grace, to be listening to what's flowing and simply flowing with it and allowing that flow to happen without actually getting in the way, recognizing it has nothing to do about you. It's not your thing. You're not saying it or doing it or speaking it. It's not your responsibility. You're just how it's flowing itself into the world.
Right. Right. So interesting. You know, it's funny, when I felt that kind of wave of terror, it had a tinge of something that really reminded me of moments when I was younger, where actually what it hasn't reminded me is like it's some version of the kinds of anxious attachment fears that come up in a relationship, of where that, and I've been on both ends of that, where I've been the one that is avoidant, and the person is after me, and I'm smothered and all those things. And I've also had the other one where I was like really into them, and all of a sudden I can't tell if they're interested, and then I'm tumbling over, right? And it's I had a wave of that. I was like, yeah, whatever this is, that there's some kind of, I just felt an interesting connection to look at. And now that I've actually now have an experience for the first time in my life called secure attachment, right? Novel to me, so novel to me. I'm struck by how simple and beautiful and transcendent it is in a very, very rich way in my marriage. And I've never had it before. So I feel as though having it, I get to have like an adult consciousness, almost like coming through the womb or something. Like I get to track everything and experience. It's really quite a surprising experience for me. So it's something that's really central in my life, is tripping out about being secure in a deep way, which has me wonder, in this dance, right, with the conversations that are emerging and the mysterious possibility that that we're listening into, what is the right thing to genuinely attach? What is secure attachment with this, right? If we kind of look at that, it'd be an interesting way of looking at that. Like, what would be the correct place to find secure attachment, such that, just like I noticed having that in my life, I'd say my relationship to the world is a lot more relaxed. I'm more apt to make like really good risks and encounter things and open to novelty that I wouldn't be comfortable enough beforehand, because there's this place, home, that is ambiguous. Like the center of the mandala is just wedded. And so that's having me be someone who I continually surprise myself in, more like the kinds of novelties I seem to be spontaneously open to that I wasn't before this.
Yeah. Mazel tov. As somebody who also spent the vast majority of his life not having the slightest, or not having an embodied experience of secure attachment. Yeah. The wave of existential relief that happens when you actually feel the possibility of it at all, and then begin to actually live in, and then, as you say, through and with it, is an enormous gift. I really like that question. It came up in me as you asked the question. You presented the question. Presented is better. And that notion of home, felt like there's if I imagine What's your wife's name?
Brienne.
Brienne.
Yes.
Vanessa. If I imagine Vanessa, and I imagine her, and then what I do is I begin to back away from imagining her, is to imagine the feeling that I associate most fully with the moments where the unconditionalness, or the wholeness, or the invulnerability, the irrevocability, the purity of the love that I feel from her, right? Not the love that I know that I have, but the love that I feel in this context, or this naming of secure attachment. And then I continue to back away from that and allow that to actually become more and more what it is in its simplicity and in its purity. And then imagine that that is simply present in every moment without any particular agent attached to it, because clearly it can't be attached to her. Right? There's nothing I could do to deserve that, and there's nothing that she could do to give it. Rather, it is something that is always already present before and around me, and before and around her, that is available through us in the quality of our relationship. But if I simply recognize that it's more a quality of something that is vastly larger, and then wonder, can that simply be the quality of relationship with the moment? Can I simply be the quality of relationship with every experience, with everything, with the world?
Yeah.
And then that's it. Right? That feeling of that quality of the feeling, the quality of feeling feels to me like that's the place to be focusing, and to be able
quality of feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When I well said, when I think about the quality of feeling, or the quality of the experience, or the quality of something, you're right. It brings my attention to something I'm in. Yeah. I want to go, what's the quality of the feeling? Like I look back, like I sink back behind my eyes. Like there's a quality of it brings that sense of, as John would say, like kind of the Wincott would call it the holding environment, right? Which it just seems that there is a quality to being that has a quality of holding, which actually gets back to that thing I was talking about earlier, the givenness of sensation, the givenness of already in, has this quality of like, oh yeah, something is giving, for which I'm indebted to, right? To a way that I can't earn, I couldn't have even wanted, right? I am the indebtedness to it in every second. Yeah, that's interesting. That where to find that place that is appropriate to attach to is the quality. Yeah, I just like where that brings my attention. It just seems like it brings it to the right place. Not content. It doesn't bring it to the content.
It brings it to the context.
Yes,
the place. Yeah.
Right. That there is.
Yeah, that has a lot of lightness to it. A lot of whoosh. There's a profound overflowing of various aesthetics going on right now, like colors and shapes and sounds, and like giggling, laughing, angelic voices, which I'm taking to mean yes.
that. Ooh.
Yeah, that's nice. Like we can kind of pivot and just be very like grounded and very practical, and just notice, say, there's a way of thinking about all the ways of knowing, right? The different aspects of knowing. And I can, again, be very simple, like just like the way that the belly knows, like in a belly way, and there's a way that the heart knows, there's a way that the spleen knows, and the way that the scrotum knows, and all the different ways, like the hands and everything else. And there's something about the quality of the voices of each of these ways of knowing that you can actually, when they all light up, right, in your whole body, like the whole body's going, boop, yes. Like hallelujah, like that's that sound. That's the sound of the sound of hallelujah is the sound of the wholeness of self, all at once, in all of its harmonious polyphony, saying yes to that. That's a very good sign.
Yes, right,
If
totally.
that's what's happening, you probably are on the right track.
Right. Make sure the W's in front of that, on the front of that word, hold. Well,
Right. Yes, it's funny. I remember having this bizarre. Well, what does it happen? It was this. It's the relationship with the older generation and their experiences.
yeah.
And there was something that went on, which of course I wasn't present to, in the 60s and 70s. And there's some phrase. I remember the phrase like, "If it feels good, do it." That I think got a very bad rap. And I think it got a very bad rap because it really radically failed to have this notion of what it means to talk about if it feels good from a wholeness of self, which includes if it feels even the least bit off, then slow the fuck down and wait and find out how you actually bring that piece in.
Mm-hmm.
The whole, right? So if the voice, the language, the logic is not yet on board, then the wholeness of self isn't there. But the inverse of that is true. Like, what else are you going to do? Like, if every single piece of you, every aspect of you, every way of knowing and thinking and being and choosing is all in alignment saying yes, then what is there even to say that you would hold back? Like, there's nothing left to hold back. There's this just being in the moment in flow, right? Actually present to what is happening fully. And then, that's the dancing, right? That's the ability to dance. And the challenge, I suppose, would be to say, can we just not separate? Can we just not have this notion of being like a separation between mind and body, or a separation between thinking and doing or something like that, but actually really have that all together as a single integral unit moving into the present?
Yeah. I like what you said. If in doubt, stop, slow the fuck down.
Yeah.
And
Be
look.
curious too. Like, it's nice. Like, if in doubt,
Yeah.
stop, and then shift to curiosity as opposed to, say, resentment. Like, oh, but I really want it. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting. It
Yeah.
really seemed like that was a really good idea, and yet something is off.
And
What can I learn from that?
there's something about this connection between the sense of play, curiosity and wonder, and safety, right? And I think that I think one of the things I noticed, and I remember when I really got this, and it hit me, it was after one of the courses that I had taught, and I was making calls to the people, just checking in with them, to integrate like their experience. And there was a woman who had this really intense experience, which she had an enormous amount of insight and went through a lot of pain in the process of having it, right? And there was a lot of content that she got. And I asked her about that, and we talked about it and all that stuff. And I was like, yeah, so what's it been like walking around during the day? And she said something. And a lot of her experience was about living in a world that was already dangerous, right? Like, not something like she observed, but something that she reported, right? And a lot of it was just kind of her seeing the way that she was seeing it, right? And she, almost independent of that whole experience that she had, she's like, yeah, I feel like just sitting in that environment of circling where all we're doing is being intensely curious and in wonder and interested in what's happening, just being in that for 3 days, I notice I'm walking around in the world and it just seems less big, right? Less scary. And that really had me start to realize, like, oh, you usually, like, curiosity is the first thing that goes when I'm anxious, right? Or I'm pissed, or I'm contracted in some way. Curiosity, it's like I'm in wonderment about who you are until you don't give me what I want, and right, and then I get pissed, and then I'm like, I don't have any curiosity. I know exactly who you are, right? That's that triggered sense of the word. But I never had really thought about that actually evoking attention and curiosity to the thing that you're the most scared of, or that you're most contracted around, that it actually can have one find themselves in a ground of safety. like that curiosity can be this thing that you can consciously bring to it, which I think is what I heard you just say. Like, okay, slow the fuck down. Look, right? Get interested in what's happening. Just that shift in context.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so many things there. Like John mentioned again in the past that he was practicing something that I had also chosen to practice a few years ago, which was first being able to distinguish between what he called a anxiety style fear and a more of an existential style fear. Mm-hmm. Second, to actually train himself to actually use or orient towards existential fear as a indicator of precisely when to activate or flex the muscle of curiosity. And I'm saying all those words the way I'm saying it because that's what you're bringing up is that, well, if something about fear or rejection or conflict collapses curiosity, well, then we can imagine that perhaps they're connected. There's a connection there. And we can perhaps imagine that if we learn how to build up the muscle of curiosity, then we can flex the muscle of curiosity and actually it'll collapse this.
Yeah. Yes.
And so it's a capacity, it's a skill set, it's a competence. And so you can then double this down and say, oh, well, now it's happening. Instead of just collapsing this, what I'm going to actually do is the opposite. I'm going to convert this into what perhaps is its more fundamental and higher purpose, which is to orient me towards that thing, which was originally creating an aversion reaction. And now is creating a curiosity reaction, which is a more powerful way of responding to it anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
And this starts to have me think about something like the religion without religion.
Ooh, nice. Mm-hmm. We're in sync. I went to the same place.
Ha.
Which is not an obvious, I mean.
Church bells, gong, gong.
Yeah. All right, let's keep going.
Yeah, just this sense of, well, somebody I've been obsessed with lately, Saint Maximus the professor, I think he lived in like 700 AD. He was like a Neoplatonic theologian.
Okay.
And what he described, you could say that what he talked about, right, was that the ground, what he thought was the ground of consciousness, what presupposed everything about consciousness, that consciousness was the fundamental ground of consciousness, is what he called it, is a existential astonishment at the givenness of being. Like, and I think the thing to highlight there is
that's nice.
It's not like there's consciousness and then it gets astonished. No, that there is consciousness is an existential primordial astonishment at the givenness of being.
Yeah. That's neat. It's like the feeling I have as I'm listening to those words is like that the pealing of a bell, like the peeling of a banana. Like there's something so astounding at the givenness of being. It's so astounding that it literally cracks open possibility. Yes. Like it's just like into
awake.
Yeah.
Awake. So on some level, what we're talking about is starting with a contraction. Oh, I notice I'm falling over myself. Stop. Notice. Get interested. If we keep following that thread back, we start to get into very deep levels of ourselves. Like, because you're following on a certain level, you're following a thread that starts off of a cultivated ability to be curious. But if you keep following that back, right, this starts to lead us into these realms that have me think of something like the religion without religion.
Yeah, so to weave this thread in, imagine you mentioned secure attachment.
Yeah,
and you mentioned what I would propose is the highly characteristic lack of in almost everyone. And then we talked about this relationship of reaction and curiosity, and the possibility of inverting them and actually building up the muscles of curiosity and reorienting towards curiosity as opposed to aversion. And then I was reflecting on, wow, what would it be like if we were to actually be able to raise children for whom secure attachment was always already simply the case, and for whom this skillfulness of orientation towards and use of curiosity was also always already the case. They didn't have to wait until they were in their late 40s to begin to practice that in groups, but it was already their inheritance in life. What would that be like? Like, what would those people even be like? What would they be capable of? That to me feels like a real, like, design requirement for the religion that's not a religion. Like, if I personally am going to be leaning into and signing up for participating in or co-creating something like that, that's like, okay, must do this.
Right.
Must result in this.
Yes. Monkey say, go there.
Yeah, go there.
Yes.
And there's something really beautiful about that, because it also has like almost like a sense of relief, because the recognition of the fact that we aren't that implies that the possibility, how do I say this? We can't, there's so much more possibility is available in humanity if humanity is simply given the chance to have these kinds of capacities from the get-go, uninterrupted. That even things that may seem really, really hard, and maybe even overwhelmingly hard for us, probably just aren't ours. Our job is to simply give rise to the people for whom those things can be, and to enable a context where they haven't gotten harder for them. Like, that's a nice design requirement, to say, okay, we're doing something already mindful of the fact that it's a generational effort, and that we can then take a look at it and say, what is our piece of that? What is ours to do now as a generation? And how do we carry our particular cross into the next stage so that the people who come after us can continue to have more and more possibility?
If I do a little experiment, so point at the wall across from me and just say that wall. Just say that wall. That wall. You now point to it and say this wall. This wall. What I feel like is more of a sense of, in a very simple way of putting it, is like we're talking about living in this world.
Yeah, that's a nice shift,
isn't it?
Yeah,
it's strikingly simple, but so revealing in its immediacy of the difference.
Yeah.
Right?
Beautiful. Yeah.
Because I think what happens is, like, if I look at this, that wall seems to already have the identity wrapped up, and it has this like pointing out quality, right? Where this wall seems to point at something different. It seems to point at something like the coupling of me and the wall.
Yeah.
The opening to relationship.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I just want to, for anybody who happens to be at this moment, just to kind of like really zoom in on that, because there's this, so slippery. That difference, the notion of what it means for there to be an interiority, and a bringing of a wholeness. That's what it is, right? It's that notion of a wholeness. It's a notion of the difference between. Oh God, I apologize. It was so perfect and so beautiful, but so many different things were being pulled in at once.
I receive this apology.
Thank you. I remember having a conversation with a guy named Peter Turchin, who's a really amazing person with a huge background, but the thing he's spending a long time on recently is called cleodynamics. And he's written a lot of books on why it is that history works the way that it has worked so far. And particularly the problem of why it is that civilizations have this really nasty habit of collapsing. And he pointed out to me that typically the way that we end up actually keeping our civilization together is that wall, meaning those guys over there who are not us, and that we are mostly defined by the degree to which we're actually able to define that which is outside of us, that we push against. So there's a push againstness of that, right? And even if it's a notion of going towards or accomplishing or conquering, there's an energy to that wall, which has an energy to it that has a primary, say to invoke it, I believe it is a yang energy. Is that right? Whereas when you shift it to this wall, it's a primarily yin energy. And there's something very different in that. And the thing that came up for me is that Peter and I and many other people have spent a reasonable amount of time thinking about this particular domain of why it is that civilizations have this nasty habit of collapsing. And notice that there isn't any real solution to that problem within the entire meta frame of that wall. And this can lead to a lot of concern if you're aware of the possibility of there being a different meta frame of this wall. And when you shift to that different meta frame, the inquiry becomes very, very different.
Right. It seems to evoke curiosity.
Yes.
It's interesting. I'm also kind of piecing together something too about this, the difference between what my understanding, or at least what I think of, what evokes these two words, which is the difference between an individual and a person.
Yeah.
Be an individual and to person, right? I think when I think of individuals, so in division, right, I kind of get a sense of like I get a picture of a bunch of half open boxes next to each other.
Yep.
Well, when I think about a person, it seems to be like a person seems to be the site of the other, and opening up the possibility of the future of its future communion. There's something about that in that frame, and I think this is now I'm starting to understand why I wanted to bring in the comments into the YouTube and why they actually why those spoke to me, because I think what I felt why I liked that, right? Why I liked the comments and really enjoyed them was that it revealed something that I didn't know that I wanted, right? That sense of, that there's that sense where I'm not walking around going, oh, I want something. But the moment someone articulates or sees it, there's been something that's been listening for it the whole time. It just didn't have the word or didn't have the thing. And that there's something about what I hear in the responses is that there's something about the conversations that are evolving, that we're all having, that are evoking thises. Right? Like this sense of like, oh, I feel like I landed with you. They said with you, right?
Yeah.
More poetry.
Yeah. It's like the question is, how is this mysterious possibility able to manifest itself? Right? And the degree to which you don't actually have awareness of the desire is actually maybe more like the notion of there's a quality or an aspect of how this mysterious possibility goes about manifesting itself that you are not yet conscious of. It's always there. It is what is necessary. It is what's necessary, an ingredient or a capacity or a presencing or a possibility that needs to be made more actual for the mysterious possibility to manifest itself is there. It's part of what is necessary. And as it becomes clear, as you're like, oh, yes, you can identify it, yesness, because it is, of course, already real. It is real, but now it's become real and noticed. It's become real and actual. And when you say thisness, that I'm there with you, that's the place we're trying to get to. So it's actually more like We're all kind of like blindly kind of feeling our way towards something, that anytime light comes through that lets us know that direction, everybody can feel it. And we're like, yes. So we're all supporting each other and pointing and saying yes, and pointing and saying yes, and pointing and saying yes. And like, okay, we just landed a little closer, man. We just got, we got to land it a little bit closer. I'm there. I'm with you. Let's keep, that helps us find our way in the journey of becoming actually clear and awake and present to the mysterious possibilities, so that we can more and more fully and more capably be in relationship with it manifesting itself.
Yes. And that constant thing that, like, what being a body is a constant trying to get the optimal grip on reality, right?
Yeah.
I think this is what John, at least, I don't know if I totally, well, I guess by definition, I'll never get to the bottom of the relevance realization that John's talking about, but I think I just got a sense of it more, of like, yeah, what I feel interesting. What's happening right now is I feel present to one. I have to I'm needing to self-regulate because I'm having so much inspiration, right? That if I wasn't as socialized as I am, it'd be a problem. But like this sense of how all of a sudden so many things from different places are becoming relevant to what we're talking about. But there is this quality of finding ourselves in it, having it already be there in some way that we couldn't produce. And that's part of the danger, is to try to produce it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sense of engaging in something with curiosity and interest, and like in a wholesomeness. But on some level, for example, the religion without religion, we've been talking about it before we mentioned that we were even talking about it on some level. Like, it's like, oh, it's relevant. Those things are coming in. And I'm noticing that as I talk about it more, the more the sense of cohesiveness I feel, and like a tautness with it. Like something's coming into grip, right? Like a not like a controlling way, but like
a dancer.
Yeah, a dance.
Like two dancers intertwined. And that the optimal grip is actually precisely that ability to be in a relationship with an other, where the freedom of the other to flow the direction the other needs to flow is absolutely perfectly held, while simultaneously you are yourself flowing and moving where you need to flow. And there's a kind of a give and a take, where the softness actually gives way and draws in and signals and shifts and pulls, right? That's the dance. Like, it's becoming that skillful in the dance.
Right, totally. And just
by the way,
yes,
I've got to go soon.
Oh, yes. Actually, so do I. Really good to meet you again.
Yes, good to see you again. I look forward to seeing what happens next. I'm feeling more and more of it. By the way, it feels like something in a geographic place kind of in between where you and I are right now. I don't know why. I just have a feeling of mountains and sun and ocean and sky.
Yeah.
All right, man. Talk soon.
Bye-bye.